The Diocese of Fargo. The faith was first planted here through the preaching of pioneer priests. It came of age with the formation of the diocese in 1889 and is still being written today under the leadership of its current apostle, Bishop Thomas Folda.
I had the opportunity to study the theology of the church, especially the spirituality of the church. I did a lot of study of the fathers of the church, the early theologians. And for me, that's been kind of a bottomless reservoir that helps me to share this great gift of our faith with our people.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America.
Sitting on the western bank of the Red River is the city of Fargo, Sea City of the Diocese of Fargo, a community of faith in eastern North Dakota with a long history of faith and devotion.
There's a strong sense of community, and even the diocese as a whole. It's not just the Sea City, it's the whole diocese, very rural, a lot of small towns. So that connection with agriculture, with the land, is very important to our people. But I do think that the Midwestern culture and worldview and a sense of being down to earth and grounded in family and community is very important here.
The area that is now Fargo was a stopping point for steamboats that were traveling down the Red River in the late 19th century. North Dakota was named for the Sioux people who've lived in the region for centuries. The area was very sparsely populated by Europeans and Americans until the late 19th century when the railroads opened up the region. The North Pacific Railway really transformed the American West.
The city is originally called Centralia, which is renamed for William G. Fargo, director of the Northern Pacific Railway and founder of Wells Fargo Express Company. One of the great churchmen in the history of the Dakotas, indeed the history of American Catholicism, is Bishop Martin Marty. Marty is a native of Switzerland. He feels called to serve the Native Americans after studying with the Jesuits and hearing stories of the great missionary priest, Father Jean-Pierre de Smet. He enters the Benedictine order and professes his final vows on May 29, 1855. He enjoys a long-standing friendship with the Lakota chief Sitting Bull, who's the great hero of the Battle of Little Bighorn. Now, there were rumors that this great chief is baptized under Marty's hands, though historians question the story and there are no actual records to confirm it.
The territory of Dakota was divided by Congress, and two new states were admitted to the Union almost simultaneously. They became North and South Dakota. The Holy See created the Diocese of Jamestown, North Dakota, which covered the entire area of the state of North Dakota. Bishop John Shanley was named the first bishop of the diocese. Shanley was born in New York, but when he was 5 years old, his family moves out west to Minnesota. He's ordained as a priest when he's 22 years old. In 1889, he's appointed the first bishop of the newly erected Diocese of Jamestown. 2 years later, he moves his residence to Fargo, North Dakota.
One of Shanley's main goals in Fargo was to promote unity among Catholics and Christians in North Dakota. This is a time of tremendous anti-Catholic bigotry across the country. So after one lecture where he's trying to show people that the Catholics are not a threat, a newspaper editor says that Shanley's goal is to brush away the cobwebs of widespread prejudice prevailing amongst English-speaking people against the Church of Rome.
Bishop Shanley made it a priority to minister to minorities and the destitute in the diocese. He invited women religious communities from Europe and Canada to come and serve in the diocese. Four in particular stand out for their successful adaptation to the frontier environment. We have the Grey Nuns from Montreal in Canada, the Sisters of the Presentation from Ireland, the Benedictine Sisters from Switzerland, and the Sisters of St. Francis from Germany. These women were extremely resourceful. They were flexible in responding to unforeseen circumstances. They established and maintained schools, started hospitals, brought much needed health care to the people in the region.
One of the lasting legacies of Bishop Shanley in the Diocese of Fargo was to begin plans for a new cathedral. When fire breaks out in 1893, however, the city of Fargo is left in ruins. And Shanley, it was a deep, deep desire of his to build this cathedral, but he saw that the community needed help. And so rather than using the money that had already been fundraised for the cathedral, he donates thousands of dollars to the town for its reconstruction. It's not until May 30th, 1899, years later, when his dream finally comes to reality and the new cathedral is finished. The cathedral not only offered Catholics a place fit for worship, but it also provides Fargo with a landmark that they can be proud of.
Bishop Shanley recognized the need for the new diocese to begin with a new cathedral. This is not only the place where the bishop's seat resides, but it also is an icon of the diocese. This is a Romanesque revival, so in very typical Victorian fashion, it's somewhat eclectic and whimsical. It's sort of a castle when you approach this red brick from the exterior, and there's lovely statuary. And again, it tells us about what it is when we approach. It has a bell tower. It welcomes us inside to participate in the heavenly liturgy, both at the Mass times and, of course, in the eternal life.
I've always found the windows to be beautiful because they let in so much light. They're vibrant in color, but they also let in a lot of light. You'll see that later in the day especially.
In the transept, there is a Holy Rosary, a stained glass window, and there's a Holy Family stained glass window. If we look at the Holy Family stained glass composition, there are 4 panels featuring the Blessed Mother and Child, Saint Joseph. And we know it's Saint Joseph because he's holding a staff with the lilies. And he points gesturally towards the Blessed Mother, as well as holding his staff with the lily, which points to the Annunciation, which you always see the angel Gabriel holding. Above, there are sacred monograms for Saint Joseph and for the Blessed Virgin. So those symbols also tell us who they are. Above that, it says Ave Maria and Id ad Joseph. So these are references to the Old Testament and how Christ is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. So we're absolutely being drawn into not only the biblical stories, but to the theology. Some of the historic artwork retained is the medallions on the triumphal arch or proscenium arch as you transition from the crossing or nave into the sanctuary. And they feature the 12 apostles as well as the Holy Spirit. Beyond the medallions, we see the image of Christ in the apse. Below that is an image of Our Lady.
Again, it's an artistic feature, but it really gives a clear sense of the apostolic foundation of our church and of this cathedral as the see church of the diocese, the mother church. You know, a bishop as successor of the apostles presides over the entire diocesan church. And so that imagery of the apostles surrounding Christ in the Blessed Sacrament of the Tabernacle, which is right at the center of everything, I think is very, very beautifully done. And I think it gives a good sense of the centrality of Christ and the apostles, the foundation that became the beginnings of the church in those early days. You know, a Catholic church can do without a lot of things, but it can't do without an altar. It has to have an altar. And, you know, to stand at the altar and to celebrate the Eucharist and to look out and see all the people who come to this altar to receive Christ in the Eucharist is a beautiful thing.
The cathedra is one of the many pieces of fine crafted woodwork, signifying the importance of the cathedra is a canopy carved from wood. And this is the seat from which the bishop shepherds the flock.
The cathedra, or chair, inside St. Mary's Cathedral represents Bishop Folda's authority as the Apostle of Fargo.
I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. My parents are James and Mabel. My father's deceased. My mother is still living. I'm the youngest of three. I have an older brother who lives in Milwaukee and a sister who lives in the Lincoln area in Nebraska. I actually had plans to either be an architect or an engineer. And so I studied in both of those areas when I went to college at the University of Nebraska. And it was during that time at the university that I first really gave some serious thought to being a priest. And I managed to put that off for a good 2 or so years before I actually decided to go forward with it. I was asked by one of the priests at the Newman Center to go with a group of other guys from the university to visit a seminary. This would have been in the fall of 1982. It kind of came out of the blue. I had been, actively participating in that campus parish, but he sat me down one day and he asked me very straightforwardly, "Have you ever thought about the priesthood?" And I said, "Well, yeah, but not very seriously." And I always remember this. He took off his glasses and he said, "Well, it's time to get serious." That very evening, I was on my way with a group of other men to visit a seminary up in Minnesota. And I would say that trip really kind of got the ball rolling. I realized at that point that this had been in my heart for a while, and I didn't think I could run from it anymore. I went to St. Charles Seminary in Philadelphia and loved it. I had a great experience there. I was there for 6 years. I finished my college degree there, and then my bishop had me stay there for theology. It was a great experience. I really loved the whole experience of being with other men who had this same calling. I was ordained a priest on May 27th, 1989. I was very fortunate to be ordained with 9 others. We were a large class. We were the biggest class that had been ordained at one time in the Diocese of Lincoln and its history. I felt very much at peace once again with that day and just the prospect of becoming a priest. My first assignment was as parochial vicar or assistant pastor at Cathedral of the Risen Christ in Lincoln, which at that time was, I'm pretty sure it was the largest parish in the diocese, so very busy. I also was teaching. I was teaching 8th grade and junior religion at the Cathedral School and also at Pius X High School. So I kind of met myself coming and going back and forth, but it was a great experience. I got a chance to see Bishop Flavin all the time and the other priests who worked there. I was there for 2 years, and then at the end of that time, he pulled me aside one day and asked me if I would be interested in studying in Rome. I studied spiritual theology at the Angelicum at the University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome. I earned what's called a licentiate. It's kind of a pre-doctoral degree, but that was a great experience as well. I came back to the Diocese of Lincoln after I finished my studies in Rome, and at that time I had a new bishop by then, Bishop Ruskowitz. He appointed me to be pastor of a couple small parishes in Syracuse, Nebraska, and a mission parish in Avoca, Nebraska. And I also was teaching high school religion in Nebraska City as well. The bishop had established St. Gregory the Great Seminary. So in 97, we were able to obtain a property, a facility. Spent a year doing renovations and preparing the program. In 1998, the seminary actually opened, and then in 1999, Bishop Ruskowitz asked me to take over as rector. And I was just completely astonished. That was not what I was expecting. But I was very happy, very honored. I had gotten to know the seminarians, and I knew many of the faculty members there. So it was a little bit overwhelming in some sense because I didn't have any experience with that work. But on the other hand, I was delighted to have that opportunity, and I loved it. I did it for 14 years. Seeing the seminarians ordained was a great blessing. It was such a joyful thing because we saw the work that had been done at St. Gregory's come to fruition. It just was a wonderful joy. I first heard that I had been chosen to be a bishop during Holy Week of 2013. I was in my office at St. Gregory Seminary, and I got a phone call. I just happened to pick up the phone because I knew my secretary was out of the office, so I just grabbed the phone when I heard it ring. I was talking with one of my faculty members. He was just sitting across the desk from me. We were just chatting after lunch. And I picked up the phone, and a man with an accented voice asked for Monsignor John Folda. And I said, "This is Monsignor Folda." He said, "Oh, Monsignor, this is Archbishop Vigano from the Apostolic Nunciature, and I have important news for you." I knew enough that there weren't very many reasons that the nuncio calls. So I asked Dr. Nolan to excuse me while I took this call. And at that point, he told me that Pope Francis had selected me to be the next bishop of the Diocese of Fargo. That was the most astonishing experience of my life. I just had this sense immediately that my life was going to change in a radical way, in ways that I could never have expected. I thought to myself, when I was ordained a priest, I promised obedience, and I saw this just as an extension of that obedience beyond my diocese, but to the universal church. And so I told him that I would accept the appointment. And after I got off the phone, I sat and thought about it for a while, and I realized very quickly that I would be leaving everything and everybody that I had known and loved in my life and in my priesthood, that I would be going to a completely new place and a new diocesan church. That's a pretty daunting thing, I would have to say. I felt very peaceful about it. I spent a little bit of time in prayer and turned it all over to our Lord. I thought, well, if this is what you want, if this is where you need me to go, then I'll go. And, the hard work is going to be up to you, but I'll do what I can, and I'll try to live up to this calling. The laying on of hands, when all the bishops imposed hands as part of the rite of ordination, was very moving for me, very powerful. To know that, I, much to my amazement, was becoming part of this college of bishops, this succession of bishops in the line of the apostles, that I would say stands out above all else. And I think in my mind, and I would say in the mind of the church too, the bishop is a pastor. We all understand the role of the pastor in a parish. Well, the bishop has that same role as pastor of his diocese, as shepherd, as teacher. It's his responsibility to lead, to accompany, to use the phrase that Pope Francis uses so much, to accompany the faithful on their journey of faith and to shepherd them and lead, sometimes to follow behind and to sometimes walk in the midst of the flock, So you just have to sort of be among them all the time and hear their needs, try to respond to those needs as best you can. You kind of got that threefold munus or office that the church talks about of sanctifying and teaching and governing or shepherding. They're all equal, they're all necessary, and they interlock, but all of it kind of coalesces in the concept of pastor, and that's the way I would see myself. I had the opportunity to study the theology of the church, especially the spirituality of the church. I did a lot of study of the the fathers of the church, the early theologians, and just the whole spiritual heritage of the church throughout the years. I have a very strong sense of that unfolding treasure house of the church's teaching and mysticism and the gifts of the Spirit, the gifts of the sacraments, the whole complex. It all comes together, I would say, in that study of the spirituality of the church. And for me, that's been kind of a bottomless reservoir that helps me to share this great gift of our faith with our people. It's a blessing. I've been very blessed to be a bishop, even in challenging times. The gift of priesthood is something that I could never thank God enough for.